Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and I did just want to post a video talking a little bit about this. We've talked a lot about the Leviathan Lightspeed bundle, and a lot of players have asked me, is this the end of, what do I think this means? Are we getting a new fleet? Is this crystals leaving Fleet Arena? Is this no change? What is this? And it's a great question, and it's a very unique Lightspeed bundle because every other bundle we've gotten out of Lightspeed, from the Lightspeed era, has been something that's not at the peak of its powers. Where Leviathan is at the peak of it, you could argue it's at the peak of its powers. It really has never been as powerful as it is right now, because it has been buffed to hell and back again to stop a lot of counters. So it's interesting. But how do we, why is it being released, and what's the purpose of it? How do I see it changing the future of Fleet Arena? Is this, what do I see? What do I hope happens? Let's talk about it, guys. Let's get into this. Let's dive in. And again, we've mentioned this in our other videos, but I've not done a just sole topic video on this. So, do I think we're getting a new fleet? Let's start here. No, at least not in the foreseeable future. I said this in another video where, number one, think about Coliseum. Think about the era units. Coliseum is not set up for ships. So that's problem number one. Coliseum would have to be revamped to add ships into it, right? Problem number two. If they release ships, what kind of ships are they? Are you going to release pilots and their ships? Are you just going to release ships where their pilots already exist? And if that's the case, how does that impact era units? Are you just gonna, borrow the pilot at whatever level your ship is? How does all of that work? It's a much more complex task than what just characters are. Is it all just gonna be crewless ships, right? I don't know. So those are areas to think about with ships that in the current system right now, I don't see how they can release them in eras. So that would mean they're either going to be a galactic chase event, which galactic chase events, when we've had them, they're very free-to-play friendly, right? Galactic chase events are extremely free-to-play friendly because you could almost always get the 7-star ship at the end of that chase, right? It was never really that much of a challenge. Now, the other side of that is we normally only had them once in a blue moon, so it wasn't like you had to do 4 or 5 galactic chase events back to back to back to back. Maybe that's, again, there's conversation. Is that the case that they would head down? Again, not sure. So I just don't see how they could release enough ships in the current state that we're getting a new one anytime soon. So then the question comes, well, Phil, are they just going to remove and, do what you've been saying for years and remove crystals from Fleet Arena? It's a possibility. I'm not going to say it's going to happen because what I can't fathom is them doing this and then pulling the rug on crystals, because the motivation for a lot of players doing this is to get first place crystals in Fleet Arena, right? That is the number one motivation for people getting this pack is Fleet Arena crystals. So if those get moved, you've completely devalued this Lightspeed bundle. Now, not saying that wouldn't be, I don't want to say par for the course for CG, but not to say that that's, that there isn't a chance that happens, but I just don't think it's very likely. So what I actually think this is boiling down to is, number one, a recognition that it's 2.5 years of Leviathan, but also it's about kind of pushing the people who spend money. Those players who spend money have had their advantage to get Leviathan. Now it's time to open up the floodgates for those other players and, push everybody further. So I could maybe see it like that, where there's probably players who are spending some money, can't really get Leviathan yet, but they could get, they're getting stonewalled in a Grand Arena simply by Leviathan, because that can legitimately happen with all the ways it's been buffed to hell. So again, I don't know how likely it would be that they would move crystals. I've always said I think moving crystals would be the way to go, and you could just throw them in Grand Arena. Now, obviously, everybody's going to look at me and be like, well, duh, Phil, you would say that. You love Grand Arena. You're in Kyber 1. Of course you want that. I feel I've earned the right to say that because when they moved crystals from Squad Arena to Grand Arena, which I know many of you are like, what? But back in the day, crystals were in Squad Arena, and it was 500 crystals for first place. So it was a significant more amount of crystals. It was like 500 here, 450, 400, 350, 300, and then 200 here, right? And then like 150, 100, you know, whatever on down the line, right? I forget how many it was, but I distinctly remember like 200 being in the top 10 still, but it was like 350, 450, 500. So you would get more crystals out of Squad Arena than you could Fleet Arena, right? But here's kind of the way I'll phrase this. When that change happened, I was thrown into a bracket where I was actually losing crystals every single day. Now, I obviously climbed and I, pushed myself, but when it first happened, I lost crystals, but I was positive because overall the game was benefiting. Now, obviously, I think Fleet Arena, it's a much different conversation because far more players might be on the losing end. So how they do that, again, I understand. I think that's been part of the reason they haven't pulled it out of Fleet Arena. But, this shift, it does mean something. What? I'm not sure, but it means something. And I think when you really look at Fleet Arena, part of the problem is this is the only game mode that is not 24-hour dependent. Think about, you have to be in first place at the time of your payout in order to get these rewards. So if I climbed up to first place, right? Like right now in these 24 hours, I'm at first place. If I'm at the time of my payout, if I'm not in first, I will not get the first place rewards, even though within that 24 hours, the highest I got was first place. That's not the way it works. But that's the way Coliseum works. Coliseum is built off the 24-hour system. This is my score. If I don't change my score for the next however many hours of Coliseum, 21 hours and 44 minutes, I might not be ranked 39, but my score will not have changed. So it will keep the highest I've done. Similar situation. Think about your conquest. It's a it's a constant thing. It doesn't matter. Your territory battles are even 24-hour waves at minimum. Territory wars, Grand Arena, it's all kind of on this 24-hour cycle where you can kind of play at your own will and it's not, say, super detrimental to the rest of the, your guild or whoever if you're not playing at a specific time. But Fleet Arena, it is. So I definitely think that's been a reason I've always thought about that is, okay, let's get it out of there. But speculating on how this will maybe, if they do move crystals or if, even we do get a new fleet, I think it begs the question of how, why haven't we got one since then, right? Why haven't we gotten a new fleet since Leviathan? And I'm honestly going to tell you guys, I think the answer is actually a lot more obvious than you think. When they released Executor, they went through a series of buffs before it landed on this final tone. Similar situation with Profundity. They landed on a bunch of buffs. After it was first released, there was a bunch of buffs before they landed at this current state. With Leviathan, right? Similar situation. It has been buffed multiple times. It's been through multiple iterations of its kit in order to get to the final place it's at. And then even to an extent, you think about the Executor got Punishing one. Profundity got Rogue one. They've released other ships to sort of keep the meta where it currently is. So the other side of that is if you release a ship that is supposed to beat Leviathan and supposed to be better than Leviathan, how much better is it going to be than Profundity? How much better is it going to be than Executor and Negotiator and Malevolence and so on down the line? Ships are created much differently than the characters. Where characters, there's this wiggle room of, hey, obviously you're like, all right, Sith Eternal might not be beating Pirate King Hondo or whatever, but this character can beat this character can beat this. There's some parity along with what certain Galactic Legends can and can't do in fights. I will say Hondo right now a little bit more on that side of ridiculousness, but hey, it's a work in progress, right? But you think with ships, it's much more rigid. There's not nearly as much wiggle room at the top end. I think in the bottom end, right, there's a lot of different, okay, Negotiator can do this, Malevolence can do this, Empire does this. There's more wiggle room down at the bottom. But at that top level, it's a lot more rigid. And so I think the problem becomes, if you release a fleet that's even better than Leviathan, well, what kind of impact does that have on the game? How much, more ridiculous does that make this current SWGO economy? I'm not going to say that I think ships are a colossal failure to this game. But I think, unfortunately, they have fallen by the wayside for too long, that I think trying to do any fundamental changes at this point would simply drive even more players away from a game, because a lot of us, myself included, already don't love interacting with ships, right? I can honestly say I don't love interacting with ships all that much. It's just kind of the truth of where it's at. But with all this said, guys, it's a lot of hey, we don't know, but I think I wanted to address some of this stuff, that there's a lot of unknowns. Doesn't mean that I don't think that bundle is really worth it. I look at Lightspeed bundles beyond just, okay, you can get first place in Squad Arena. I'm looking at that or Fleet Arena. I'm looking at that and saying, hey, those are Relic 5 and Relic 7s that you can now invest in another Galactic Legend. It's the time savings with Lightspeed bundles that I think are far more valuable. Obviously, you're getting something, but all of us, when I bought the Rey Lightspeed bundle, it wasn't like Rey was this unbelievably amazing Galactic Legend, right? She was good, but she wasn't like she was the Leviathan level. I did that because it saved me time, it saved me resources, it saved me things, and allowed me to open up other avenues of my account. And that's always the way I view Lightspeed bundles. And I think if you view them within that context, things get a lot simpler in the game. The final thought I want to leave you with. If you buy this bundle and then something does change, please don't go in the comments and freak out and say this is ridiculous. Because that is the game, right? That is the risk you are taking, right? That is the risk. Just think, as much as you might hate to admit this, for all we know, tomorrow's the last day that this game is active, right? We don't know. So there's always a risk with these things. There's always a chance that it happens, and you just have to be able to live with that one way or the other. I hope this helps provide some context. Let me know what you guys think down below. Love you all. May the force be with you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, my friends.